6G internet, supercomputers the size of our palms, endless highways, self-driving cars, all the information we could ever need at our fingertips, diet pills to make us slimmer, and AI to tell us we're always right. In the world of Peter Thiel, Bill Gates, and Elon Musk, this is only natural. This is progress. The thinking goes that since the Industrial Revolution, we've been on a linear or perhaps even exponential path upwards towards a better world. Life expectancy is better, education numbers are up, people are living more comfortable lives, and environmental issues like pesky deforestation or climate change will get solved soon thanks to new technologies like nuclear fusion or the genius of AI. Thought leaders and elites have told us time.
These large companies with their great resources and their innovation power, if we get them to apply that more significantly for those with the most need, that we can reduce impoverishment far faster than simply relying on government alone.
And time again.
For businesses big and small, the energy transition creates the single largest industrial growth opportunity since the Industrial Revolution.
That more stuff, more growth, and more production has made the world a better place. But what if they're wrong? What if everything you've been told about the beautiful progress we've achieved over the last 200 years is wrong? What if that endless climb upwards hasn't always been upwards? What if that 6G internet and the latest smartphone model have just masked a festering cesspool of inequality, exploitation, and environmental degradation all along? This video is sponsored by Climatize. 10:32 a.m., January 19th. Bill Gates tweets out a graphic displaying several different graphs that reveal life has improved significantly for many people over the last 200 years. As if to soothe himself for being one of the richest people in the world for well over 2 decades, Gates seemed to argue that actually things were getting a whole lot better for a whole lot of people. Bill Gates...
People are lucky to live now, and they should see that that progress is actually taking place faster during their lives than at any time in history.
Alongside academics like Steven Pinker, who wrote Enlightenment Now.
Overall, net welfare for humankind has never been better and is getting better all the time?
It's never been better. Whether it will continue to get better depends on whether we continue to seek human well-being as our goal.
Have taken up the mantle of what's been called New Optimism, a collection of academics and elites that wield graphs and cold hard facts to explain that actually the world is doing just fine. Exemplified in Bill Gates' January 19th tweet and Pinker's Enlightenment Now, the underlying argument of New Optimism is that capitalism has been a net positive for humans and the planet. If you just look at the graphs, you can see we've made so much progress since the Industrial Revolution. And progress for these new optimists is a linear path. The more production there is, the more wealth there is in the world, the more capital accumulated, and ultimately the better life is for people around the world. A rising tide lifts all boats. But let's be clear here, progress in their minds really means capitalist progress. The unspoken message of all these graphs, of books like Enlightenment Now, is that we've advanced socially and technologically because of capitalism. As Professor Jason Hickel explains,
there's this strange narrative out there that says that social progress, improvements in social outcomes, are sort of the spontaneous gift of capital accumulation.
Social progress, such as life expectancy or poverty reduction, in the minds of capitalists, is tightly tied to growth. The economy continuously needs to grow if the cycle of capital accumulation, which involves investing money into labor and materials to produce goods that then sell for even more money, is to continue. And that accumulation of capital, the narrative goes, occasionally sloughs off into the social realm, leading to better education outcomes, higher life expectancy numbers, and better well-being. And for the proof, all you have to do is look at the graphs. So let's actually go back to one of those graphs that Bill Gates tweeted almost 7 years ago and really examine its claims. This graph looks at the number of people below the extreme poverty line. Poverty is an imperfect metric for well-being, but a good enough yardstick for getting a glimpse of quality of life under a capitalist world order. According to this graph, the number of people living in extreme poverty has plummeted since 1820. This sounds amazing, and I wish it were that simple, but the graph unfortunately hides some truths. The first of which is that accurate poverty data doesn't exist before 1980, so the majority of the graph is just guesswork. Next, extreme poverty, according to this graph, is defined as living with under $3 per day. More accurate numbers for what is needed to sustain a somewhat normal life hover around $8 per day. One economist puts the poverty level around $7.40 a day, while the New Economics Foundation concludes that around $8 is necessary to reduce infant mortality by a meaningful margin. This paper even concludes that we should throw out the dollar per day metric and instead look at the costs of collection of bare necessities needed to survive in any given context, which is often far over $3 per day. Creating a new graph based on the lower end of poverty metrics, $7.40, Jason Hickel found that the number of people in poverty hasn't declined at all. Rather, it has grown dramatically since 1981, going from 3.2 billion to 4.2 billion, according to the World Bank data. And when he took the population of China, whose country straddles the line between socialism and capitalism, and has been one of the main reasons why we saw those plummeting numbers in Bill Gates' graph, out of the picture, Hickel notes that the proportion of people in poverty today is almost exactly the same as it was in 1981, with no net progress at all. And finally, there's an assumption in Bill Gates' graph that poverty rates will continue to decrease as time marches on. Yes, that means we can greatly increase people's well-being, but it also could mean a fossil fascist takeover like we're seeing play out today with Trump in the US, which could make this graph reverse in no time. Ultimately, graphs like these paint a remarkably convenient narrative for someone like Bill Gates, who is at the top of the capitalist food chain. They weave a tale that, if you just zoom out, capitalism and capitalist growth have been a positive force for humanity over the last 2 centuries. As we'll see later though, progress, especially social progress, but also technological progress, is very rarely spurred on by profit incentives or the engines of capital. Yes, we cannot deny that capitalism does encourage a fair amount of technological advancement. As Marx writes in Volume 1 of Capital, capitalist production therefore develops technology. But this progress is almost always shaped and twisted by those in power. Indeed, Marx finishes that argument with, only by sapping the original sources of all wealth, the soil and the laborer. So the type of progress is decided by those in power, by the Bill Gateses, the Elon Musks, the Trumps of the world, the capitalists. The car is a perfect example of deciding what is progress. We have had mobility technologies for hundreds of years that could make cities car-free. A city with streetcars, light rail, and regional trains. A city where streets aren't death traps, where we don't develop asthma from smog, where greenhouse gas emissions drop dramatically, where you don't have to sit in hours of traffic every day just to get to work. We can create that city. And indeed, urban centers in the early 20th century were beginning to build around that model. But then the forces of capitalism came to town. You see, streetcars and public transit just aren't that profitable. It's hard to sell people more and more stuff to accumulate capital when those people's needs, in this case mobility needs, are met. So companies like General Motors and Standard Oil went around and bought up streetcar companies across America, not to expand them, but to shut them down. They decided that the future of the American city would be car-centric. Thus, the shape of progress, both social and technological, was decided by corporations following the undeniable scent of profit. Here, we begin to glimpse the problem. When Bill Gates and the new Optimists champion progress, we need to question who really benefits from that so-called progress. And when considering that climate change, inflation, wars, and increased political polarization are on the upswing, is this progress coming with profound costs? Throughout the 19th century, the British were hard at work bringing so-called progress to India. British capitalists enclosed and privatized the communal forest, waterways, and lands of millions of Indian peasants. As Jason Hickel writes, the colonists wielded these policies to make the rural farmers of India at the mercy of hunger so that they would have no choice but to intensify agricultural production for export to London if they wanted to survive. In short, British capitalists brought the wonders of capitalism to India. Markets, privatization, and global trade weaseled their way into India, and an estimated 12.2 to 29.3 million people died from famine. With capitalist growth, with capitalist progress, comes capitalist destruction. Capitalism has historically been constructive in developing methods of production. We cannot deny this. But with that progress and growth has come ruination. With the cotton gin came the increased exploitation of enslaved people, with the power loom came the brutal factory system, and with the internal combustion engine came the climate crisis. Capitalism develops the productive forces of our society as a means to exploit and extract even harder. As Karl Marx notes, on the one hand, there have started into life industrial and scientific forces which no epoch of former human history had ever suspected. On the other hand, there exist symptoms of decay far surpassing the horrors recorded of the latter times of the Roman Empire. The newfangled sources of wealth, by some strange, weird spell, are turned into sources of want. We live in a world where the vast amount of wealth created is funneled into the coffers of just a few people. The top 10% of the richest people on Earth own 76% of global wealth. Meanwhile, the bottom 50% account for just 2% of that wealth. How can we call this progress? Indeed, you cannot talk about social or technological progress without also recognizing the ways in which capitalist production builds and sustains that so-called progress. You cannot talk about the wonders of the smartphone, which, by the way, was built thanks to state-backed programs, without also recognizing the vast network of colonial plunder and exploitation in artisanal mines like that in Kolwezi in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And you cannot talk about capitalist progress without talking about fossil fuels. Fuels that we rip from the ground, burn into heat-trapping gases that cause climate change, and facilitate the exploitation of workers by allowing capitalists the flexibility to build their factories anywhere and produce commodities at all hours. In our current version of capitalism, fossil fuels are what lubricate the engines of capital accumulation. Regardless of whether you think capitalism has directly fostered the betterment of humanity over the last 200 years since the Industrial Revolution, there is no shying away from the fact that it has plunged us deep into the climate crisis. It's plunged us deep into biodiversity collapse, ocean acidification, and is marching us towards various tipping points. Let's understand this at a smaller level. Let's switch back to the smartphone for just a moment. A device that is held up as the pinnacle of innovation and progress in today's world. And in many ways, it has made life easier for so many people. It allows us to navigate where we need to go, access information anywhere, and talk to our friends at the push of a button. But the ecological cost of smartphones under capitalism has been tremendous. Thanks to the relentless pursuit of profit, capitalists produce new smartphone models every single year, or even multiple times a year, that barely iterate on the last model. Quickly, your phone becomes obsolete, whether you want it or not, through planned obsolescence, lack of software support, or perceived obsolescence. And soon, the mountains of e-waste pile up. In just 2022 alone, an estimated 5.2 billion smartphones were thrown away. We plow deep into the earth and burn hundreds of millions of gallons of fossil fuels to produce these smartphones, only to trash them a couple of years later. And even when we do use them, one researcher calculated that the global emissions from smartphones in use accounts for 1% of global annual carbon emissions. But of course, smartphones are just one piece of the puzzle. We've deforested 1 billion hectares of forest since 1900, and land use change has driven us into what is now being called the sixth mass extinction. Not to mention that this land use change, alongside capitalist-intensive animal agriculture, brings us closer to wild and diseased animals, causing pandemics like COVID, SARS, and swine flu. But thank God we have our modern medical system in the face of these pandemics, right? Well, once again, the forces of capitalism are holding us back from saving as many lives as possible. In the case of COVID, once private companies developed their proprietary vaccines, thanks in large part to the substantial backing of taxpayer dollars, they didn't turn around and hand them out for free everywhere. Indeed, the New York Times reported that Moderna seemed to be withholding crucial vaccine supplies to countries that couldn't pay high prices for them. Our pharmaceutical industry as a whole is not based on providing the most care to the most people, but instead on creating the drugs that will sell the best and make the most profit. You only have to look so far as the Oxycontin crisis to see that our medical system revolves around the profit incentive. Or the AIDS crisis in the 1980s, when the primary push for research on drugs, medical treatment, and clinical trials wasn't coming from pharmaceutical corporations or the government, but instead activist groups like ACT UP, fighting for their lives. At this point, you might say, why are you trying to make the world seem like a terrible place? Well, I think that the goal of all of this critique, and indeed the goal of all critique in my opinion, is not to wallow in misery. Instead, it should be to figure out the real causes of why things are going well or why things are going wrong. We need to understand whether those graphs Bill Gates tweeted are real and what is actually causing them. The goal is to get to the root and then figure out a way to build a world where we can make actual progress. Despite all the ills of capitalist exploitation and degradation, things do look remarkably different than they did 200 years ago. So does that automatically mean that the engines of capital are the cause of any sort of social progress we've achieved? The answer is no. Indeed, most social progress, environmental repair, and climate action have come not from the continuous growth of capitalism, but despite it. The 8-hour workday, for example, or even occupational safety measures and monitoring were not just handed down to us by factory owners out of the goodness of their hearts. Instead, it was because workers banded together to make change. Strikes like that in 1872 in New York City, where over 100,000 workers walked off the job to demand an 8-hour day, or in 1886 when 350,000 workers across the country struck with the demand 8-hour day with no cut in pay, were common throughout the late 19th and early 20th century, and eventually forced employers to standardize the 8-hour day. Progress and well-being, then, comes most often from movements, unions, and everyday people struggling against capitalists for a better life. And the same goes for climate change. Most of what we've accomplished so far in terms of emissions reductions didn't come from corporations following the good of their heart, let alone following profits. Climate progress came out of pressure from the climate movement, whether it be directly blocking the construction of pipelines, shutting down coal plants, or pressuring regulators to actually do their job. Climate action has been driven by courageous people everywhere working against the insatiable appetite of capital accumulation. So reforms within capitalism like the 8-hour workday, cleaner air, decreased child labor have all come from labor and social movements fighting for their lives against the forces of capital. But even those wins are constantly under threat. Capitalists in the US, for example, have successfully started to roll back child labor laws, environmental regulations, and are actively hunting down and disappearing immigrants in ICE raids. So as we look towards the future, it's crucial to remember the true engines of social progress. It's not profit, it's not capital accumulation, it's real people struggling for better lives and a healthier environment. If we know that capitalism is not the driving force behind our social progress, behind education, well-being, or planetary health, but instead what is holding us back, we must then get rid of it. Indeed, we cannot keep holding up how bad life was 200 or 400 years ago as a comparison for how good capitalism is now. There have been no other global economic systems in that time span for us to actually know whether capitalism has truly done a good job. And alternative economic systems that have tried have been heavily besieged by capitalist forces. As Professor Thomas Pogue notes, our yardstick for progress shouldn't be how much we've done compared to 200 years ago, but instead the extent of the problem now compared to our current capacity to fix it. From this viewpoint, as we have seen, capitalism is failing, and failing badly. We have all the food we need to feed everyone, and yet billions go hungry. There's enough wealth for everyone to live a good life, yet it's overwhelmingly concentrated in the hands of the few. And we have all the technologies and capacity we need to build a zero-carbon world that heals our relationship with the land, yet we continue to extract and burn more and more fossil fuels. We have the tools to solve so many global problems, but aren't. Or if we are solving them, we're doing it at a snail's pace. What is the alternative then? In my mind, it is a system of planned eco-socialist degrowth. We need an economic system, a social system, a culture that prioritizes the well-being of people and the planet. Our decisions should not be predicated on profits and the endless cycle of capital accumulation. They instead must be rationally planned based on use, well-being, and planetary health. Planned eco-socialist degrowth means a lot of things, but most of all, it means doing away with waiting and hoping for market forces or the altruism of the super rich to change the world, and instead organizing our economy intentionally so food goes where it's actually needed, renewables and zero carbon transit flourish, and people can actually be comfortable wherever they choose to call home. This all means investing in things that actually make us happier, more comfortable, and live more sustainably, like accessible public transit or community farms or even renewable energy. Of course, that world doesn't just come by sitting around. We need to organize and struggle for that future. We need to struggle, as we've always done, for true progress. But if you want to learn about renewable projects that are seeking funding before that world is built, you can right now. In fact, I just invested in a project to help build a solar array, and I did it through today's sponsor, Capitalism. Capitalism is a US-based, SEC-registered FINRA member investing platform that connects people like you and me to vetted renewable energy projects that are seeking funding across the country. With Capitalism, anyone over the age of 18 with a US bank account can start contributing to clean energy projects nationwide. From a solar installation for a school in New York to a nonprofit developing plug-and-play solar panels you can plug in anywhere in your house. Each project hosted on Capitalism is vetted and registered under SEC regulation crowdfunding, giving you full transparency to review details before deciding if it aligns with your values and financial goals. And as with any investment, projects on Capitalism carry a risk of underperformance or loss. This isn't investment advice, so please review all available information before making any decisions on how you invest. But right now, Capitalism is offering something special for the Our Changing Climate community. When you sign up using my link and use the code OCCN50 to complete your Capitalism profile, you'll receive $50 in investment credit. This is important. You'll only earn that credit once you've completed your profile, and it's only available for us on their platform. And a minimum investment from the investor's fund must be applied when using it. So if you want to learn more about projects working towards climate solutions, sign up using the code OCCN50 and explore at climatise.earth/ourchangingclimate.